Think first of all, you have to be self aware enough to accept that part of yourself as a quote unquote dark side, right? But a lot of times I think it's the way that you frame it and how you utilize it in the world. Like for me personally, I have from a very young age battled a lot of different anger issues. I mean, to the point of just like, having to go to jail over certain situations, right? Like, and what I came to realize through really exploring that dark part of myself is that ultimately that's one of my greatest strengths. That's one of my greatest tools because I am a passionate person.
Welcome, everybody, to Habitual Growth. I've got a very special guest today. This is a good friend of mine, Joshua Perry, who happens to be a fantastic father, a musician, an entrepreneur, a construction worker. I mean, I think you pretty much do it all at this point in time. So what I'm going to do, instead of butchering your introduction, I'm actually going to turn it over to you, Josh, to introduce yourself, tell the people a little bit about yourself, some of the highlights and things they need to know about you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. I do pride myself on being a jack of all trades. I've been involved in the music industry for a long, long time. We built production and video wall and lighting systems. I've also been involved in the transportation industry for a long time. And, I'm all about just self improvement and being the best version of yourself that you can.
Yeah, I love that. And, we've known each other for a couple of years now. And I would say we became fast friends when we were first introduced. But more importantly, I think we saw really the paths that each other was on. You were developing all these different things. You yourself have developed some mobile applications. As you said, you were in transportation. We've talked a little bit about AI and logistics and warehousing and things like that. You work with celebrities and, entertainers that everybody knows. You produce these albums. You do a lot of these things. But today's topic is actually something that you and I had tripped into, I want to say, maybe 6 months or so ago, but it's something that we both have kind of had to work through. And that really is embracing our dark side, right? There's, in the personal development realm, and when you're always trying to be the best version of yourself, you always try to portray this light. And the best example I probably can give is like social media. Everybody wants to see the highlights. Everybody wants to put their best stuff out there, and nobody really wants to talk about the darkness that sometimes lies within. And I know you've got some incredible stories out of that, but just kind of leveling the playing field. What does that mean to really work with both your good side and maybe your dark side of your personality?
Think first of all, you have to be self aware enough to accept that part of yourself as a quote unquote dark side, right? But a lot of times I think it's the way that you frame it and how you utilize it in the world. Like for me personally, I have from a very young age battled a lot of different anger issues. I mean, to the point of just like, having to go to jail over certain situations, right? Like, and what I came to realize through really exploring that dark part of myself is that ultimately that's one of my greatest strengths. That's one of my greatest tools because I am a passionate person and I do feel very deeply, but I had to come to resolve the fact that that was just the easiest emotion for me to process, right? So for me personally, anger was a big emotion that I had to deal with and, having some bad situations that it really put me in. But ultimately, it was all about learning how to take that passion and an easily processed emotion to put that same passion into creativity for me, right? Like being able to take the raw piece of myself and process it and refine it into something that was useful. In my case, producing large shows, producing artwork, helping my community bring a creative piece that everyone can enjoy and working through those frustrations internally to be able to get that out into the world.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I kind of want to pull a couple layers back, maybe a little bit more of that onion, just around like what is it? People hear the words like dark side, right? And I immediately think of like Darth Vader, Star Wars, like, the things that were nostalgic from when you and I grew up. But what does that really mean in terms of behaviors, maybe even thought processes? Can you give us some examples of things that may not be just anger, because there's so much more to understand around what a dark side really is. And I think people immediately associate with something that's like evil, super dark, almost frustrating, that anger piece that you were talking about. But I think the expanse is way more than that. Is that true?
100%. In fact, I think anger is just typically the one that is easiest to deal with. And that's why people, especially guys, default to that because that's just how we're hardwired, right? But I think for all peoples, I think doubt is probably the most thing because internally what happens is it's very hard to make any kind of decision when you're in doubt, right? And your mind is a survival tool if you think about it like that, right? And so it's really designed to stop you from getting eaten by the saber-toothed tiger, whatever the saber-toothed tiger is. And a lot of times indecision and doubt is safer than moving forward into the unknown, right?
Mm, yeah.
So I think the most, it sounds kind of silly, but I think the most evil and the most darkness that you can ever see, you can only see within yourself. You can't see externally out in the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, you and I were kind of talking before about this as well, but I have specifically put something on my body. I have a tattoo on my chest that's the insignia from the base that I was born on, but
Hmm.
it's got Latin on it, Mors Inimicus, and the Latin means death to the enemy. It's actually the F-16 fighter division insignia. But for me, the enemy is that internal voice that says, oh, you're not good enough. You don't have the resources. You can't move forward. That doubt
Hmm.
talking about here. And so I put that on me as a reminder of like, that's the real enemy, right? Like
Yeah.
being able to move forward decisively is the true hero in the story, if you will.
Yeah.
And being able and not being able to do so and doubting yourself is the real enemy of your own story.
Yeah, I love that, and I think, dude, I think that's so true. And we've talked about this before. One of my favorite books, and actually the book that changed my life, was "Outwitting the Devil" by Napoleon Hill. And there is a chapter in there where he's conversing with the devil, right? And one of the tricks the devil uses to slow people down is drifting. It's indecision, and I'm really glad you pulled that out, because I'm obviously Christian. One of the things that I really focus on is actually labeling what those dark forces are. For me, that's evil. That's Satan. If you're not a believer, you don't have organized religion, you know, I think it really helps to label whatever that is, and dark side or whatever else you want to say it. But what comes to light when you do that, number one, you have to be self-aware. And I want to talk a little bit about becoming self-aware of your dark side, your thoughts and your emotions and things like that. But then two, when you label it, when you put it in this corner and in this box, and you're like, no, this is the devil attacking me, or this is the evil that is coming after me right now, I'm going to defeat it. It almost becomes this internal battle that you can overcome, and then figure out how to channel that emotion, those thoughts, that frustration, whatever it is, in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think by labeling it, it makes those outward battles a lot easier
Hmm.
because having an adversary makes a battle easier, right? But the real tough ones are the ones that you just have to accept, right? The ones that you have to say, okay, that is a part of me. That is part of my darkness and my shadow side. And what you have to really do, I think, is shift your perspective to say, how can that be useful in the world? How can that be productive for me or for someone else? And that retooling of the same darkness, because the same thing that drives anger can drive you to be motivated to overcome something, right? Or the same thing that frustrates you in your perfectionist side, which I battle with as well, right? I'm a recovering perfectionist. Um,
It's never
that
right.
but that same frustration can motivate you to bring tangible solutions to whatever a problem is. And that's how entrepreneurs are born, really, I think, is that, we just get so fucking fed up with something that we say, okay, we're going to find a solution for this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so again, I think the outward battles are quote unquote the easier battles, right? Because you can pit yourself against an adversary there. The real challenging battles to me are that shift in perspective where it's like, okay, how can I look at this shadow side from the other side of the shadow, right? And kind of,
Mhm.
you almost have to slip into the darkness, I feel a little bit, to look at it for what it truly is.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think that's totally true. We're gonna go down that a little bit more, but can you give us an example of how you're kind of redirecting things in your own life? What is that when you say embrace the dark side and then maybe redirect it to be a little bit more productive to overcome a challenge? Because that does happen externally, but as you said, it's a little bit less frequent than internally. It's more of this internal monologue that we kind of tell ourselves. So, what have you done? What have you been able to do to develop your like mental fortitude and productivity to build a process that helps you with that recognition, but then turn it into something greater?
So for me personally, I think this is with a lot of people as well. Taking a pause and sitting with something and letting it process or percolate, if you will, is a huge thing. And I personally use meditation. I know a lot of people use various different tools and stuff. Even therapy, I think, is good for processing, right? But being in that moment in particular and taking an observational view of what's going on rather than letting that emotion or that dark part carry you without that thought, right? So, and I don't think it's just a stoic type of reason, logic thought. I think a lot of it is the opposite of that, actually. I think it's an emotional processing. I think it's an emotional view of what's going on with you and just kind of gauging your temperature in that fight, if you will, right internally
Mhm.
at the moment and saying, okay, I'm pissed off right now. Maybe I shouldn't go talk to my kids about whatever they're doing, right?
Yeah.
I'm feeling a little depressed. Maybe I shouldn't address this with my wife, right?
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
feeling a little frustrated right this moment. Maybe I shouldn't talk to my boss about my concerns, right?
Yeah.
And time is a funny thing in that if you give it just a little bit to percolate, often your response internally and externally is going to be totally different.
Yeah, 100%. And it's funny when you started this out, I wasn't sure where you were going, but that's immediately went through my mind is I try to. I'm not as good as I would like to be, but I was very good for a while, but I would give myself 24 hours to sit on something before I responded back. If it was an email I didn't like, if it was, a phone call or a text I had gotten from somebody and it rubbed me the wrong way, I would sit on it because I used to get a little bit fiery. I would go after people and I would say a bunch of things that in the moment were true, but in the grand scheme of things, probably caused way more drama, way more frustration, blew the situation out of control. And so time does help things simmer. And I was watching this video by Alex Hermosi a couple of months ago. And it was completely unrelated actually to what we're talking about in embracing the dark side, but the application is still the same. He was actually talking about controlling your diet. And when you get this thought of like, hey, I need something sugary, and he was using dessert. I can't remember what he said, a candy bar, I want this. And he was like, just give yourself 20 minutes. He was like, don't act on it right away. Give yourself 20 minutes and you will find, it's like 95% of the time, it's just this fleeting response. And I've always found with specifically anger, frustration, doubt, that type of stuff is still the same, right? I think the timeline varies, at least for me. I can get over frustration much faster than I can sometimes anxiety or feeling depressed or sad about something. But when you do allow time to take place, you have different thoughts, you have different experiences, your direction, your journey is crafted slightly differently so that you can not have this auto response of that fight or flight mechanism that you were referencing earlier in the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, for me personally, and I think this is for a lot of people, that somatic response of fight or flight hitting very, very quickly can be soft. The blow can be softened by taking just a little bit of that pause. And interestingly enough, I learned this from my kids. So, I have kids with autism. And we have had a lot of struggles with that over the years, right? Very, very harsh reactions is the way that I'm going to put it to minimal stimuli in a lot of cases, right? For a long, long time, my stepson didn't even go to Walmart. In fact, he didn't go to Walmart until he was about 15 or 16 years old because he just couldn't handle the lights and the loudness and all the people and movement and stuff, right? It was just too overwhelming for him. And Walmart stores are actually designed to do that, believe it or not, to overwhelm you so you get this buying impulse, right? So we had to prepare him in such a way that most of the things that were going to happen throughout a trip for Walmart were very predictable. And I mean, down to the minutia, like, hey, we're going to get out of the car. We're going to grab the handle, get out of the car, shut the door, walk to the door in Walmart. The doors are going to open. And I mean, every little detail we would step through of what we're buying, what's on the
Hmm.
list, where we're going, what order things are going to be in. And I think even for neurotypicals, right, having a bit of predictability, having a bit of processing, having a bit of determining what's going to happen next really, really is effective at number one, determining what your reaction is going to be. And number two, recognizing that reaction for what it is when it does happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so happy you went there. You're always one step ahead of me, Josh, but because that was something that I had learned and I wanted to bring up for you, which is, for me, disempowering those dark voices. So, sometimes we want to embrace it, we want to redirect. Other times we want to disempower that voice. And I think a lot of that to comes with how do we control it a little bit more? And oftentimes in the pause that we had just talked about, those 24 hours as an example for me, I will think through different things. Well, how could I have done this a little bit differently? Or what happened that I allowed this to happen? And I know we can't control everything, but we can control our responses. We can control our emotions. And it sounds like you do that with your sons in some instances, or maybe a lot of instances. So, how does that apply maybe for those that don't have kids with autism, but how does that apply in like business scenarios or relationships or things like that, where you can think through some of the obstacles that may happen? You may get in front of, hey, I may have this thought and this is what I'm going to do to disempower that voice when it does come up.
So glad you kind of mentioned that because I have grown greatly as a salesperson in particular because of this technique, right? I try to think ahead to what the objection is going to be and get in front of it before it's ever addressed. If we're talking about a big enterprise deal, I'm going to walk down through as many steps as possible with, and even put out some of those potential fires before they ever happen, right? Or at least bring awareness of this is going to be a fire that we're going to have to walk through together on this deal, right? This is the potential of what's going to happen. And 9 times out of 10, a client really appreciates number one, the experience that you're bringing to the table, and you gain a little bit of trust through that. But number two, that you know how to guide them through hell because putting a deal together can be hell, man. It's like, it doesn't matter what business you're in, in transportation, it's like I may be talking about moving an entire 1,000,000 square foot warehouse from one location to another. That is not a fucking easy task. Let me here to
Yeah.
tell you.
Yeah.
On the, entertainment side of the business, I may be talking about putting $2 million worth of assets in a parking lot and having 40 people who haven't touched it in 6 months put it all together, right?
Yeah.
And so, both of those are kind of nightmare scenarios if you just lay them out like that. But you go to a client and you say, hey, look, we know there's going to be some challenges with this. We know that it's going to take this amount of time. These are potential things that could come up. We're going to try to be prepared with this, but I might need your help with this. Now you're talking about reliable, predictable outcomes. And
Yeah.
I think that's what we all as people really seek in our relationships and our business dealings and our dealings with our kids is just reliable, predictable outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. How do you, and this is a tangential question, but it kind of goes down the same vein. How can we maybe control our environment or the information that we take in to help distinguish which voice is speaking to us, the good voice, the powerful voice, the dark side, right? Because I have some thoughts I want to share on this, but I'd love your thoughts first.
I think I'm gonna step back a little bit and frame this in such a way that I think you can really pollute your mind. And a lot of what goes on in today's internet and Instagram crazy world is just mind pollution that I think by restricting what you intake just as you would your diet, but restricting that mental intake allows you to sit in a place of power to be able to frame what you want to frame, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you're feeding your mind with, porn and TikTok, like you're going to just get so far off the rails because there's so many bits of information coming at you, and your mind and your emotions aren't designed to process all that kind of just chatter and static, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you are disciplined and you are feeding yourself with things like habitual growth, with reading a book, with exercise, with like all these things that your mind needs for fuel, you can come from a place of stability with how you are thinking about or framing something.
Yeah, exactly. And that mirrors very similar to my thoughts on this. And I'll give you two examples. So I've recently been having a lot of anxiety, and I couldn't figure out why. I would go to bed and my mind would be racing. And, I have pressures like everybody else, financial pressures, relationship pressures, whatever it is. But I would go to bed and I just could not shut off my mind. And finally I had to realize, well, what have I been doing? What have my behaviors been? And I had this terrible habit of opening X right before I went to bed. And if you've ever been on X, it's a great platform. I think you get a lot of good stuff there, but you can very quickly go down the rabbit hole. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at all these things, and my mind starts to wander. And I'm like, well, I've got to protect this, and I've got to do all these things. And I literally, like, I have a rule. Well, I will not go on it like after 12 o'clock because I just don't want those distractions, that mind noise that creeps in, because you're right, it does issue in some thoughts and some responses. Now on the other side, I'm currently doing phase 2 of the Live Hard program. I'm a very stubborn person. I need a loud voice like Andy Frisella's to just pound things into my head so that I listen. He's aggressive, he swears a lot. That stuff doesn't bother me, but his message is still really positive overall. He really has the passion to try and get people to think outside of the box to be better. I say that because I'm doing that program while simultaneously I have people sending me long form videos like Napoleon Hill. And so I'll be listening to Napoleon Hill, their YouTube videos, for about 45 minutes to an hour, where it's just this, you can do this. And if you think about these things in this way, you can bring wealth, you can bring spirituality, you can bring whatever you want. And it's just a different message that comes with it. And when I hear those messages, I get excited. I'm all of a sudden I'm working out a little bit faster. My attention span is much longer versus, like you're saying, like a TikTok where it's like every 30 seconds you're getting a different stimuli. It's just kind of cycling through. And we don't oftentimes think about our content in that way. I think we all intrinsically know it, right? Positivity breeds positivity, negativity breeds negativity, but it's also how quickly you're cycling through some of these things that I do think impacts us at a greater rate than we actually realize.
Well, and for me, like I have a lot of stuff coming at me all the time, right? Like I have probably 500 emails a day, no telling how many text messages and Instagram messages and Facebook stuff. And just like it's got to be over 1,000 on a daily basis, right? I don't necessarily want to stop that momentum, but what I do is I restrict my attention for it because attention in today's world has become just as much as commodity as money or fiat currency, right? And so that's what all these platforms are vying for. That's what everybody's really after is your attention, because they know once they grab your attention, it's only a matter of time before we can grab your money or any of the other things, because in some cases, grabbing your attention is even causing the problem that they want to fix and get you
Yeah.
paid for, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, I don't necessarily want to stop the momentum of all the things coming at me, but what I do is I will take time to go away from my phone, away from a TV. Typically in nature is where I'm going, where I'm going for as blank a canvas as possible in both my external and internal world,
Mhm.
a minimum of one time a day. And look, it doesn't have to be in nature. I do it all the time in my office. I'll literally just get out of my chair, sit in the floor, as lame as that sounds, and
Yeah.
just take some breathing exercises in and allow everything to kind of slow down a little bit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I can
Yeah.
jump right back in the river and see of text messages that I got and paddle away like crazy, right? But using that same analogy, if we are talking about a river of information and you're in a kayak going down the river or a canoe or whatever, like you're not going to paddle the whole time. You're going to pull over to the bank. You're going to lay on the bank and drink a beer, catch some sun, and kiss on your girl or whatever. And then you're going to hop back in the canoe and keep going down the river. So I think people have to take more of that time to be find that discipline within themselves of not processing even.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's awesome, and that I completely agree. I think a lot of that has to do with structuring environments, and let's talk about this a little bit more because you have this presence about you now, which is much more stoic. You used the word stoic earlier in the conversation, and when I first met you, that wasn't there. That's something that you have developed over the last year and a half, I would say, maybe 2 years. You've been working on it. I've seen you actually on social media only put out like really positive vibes. You put out positive messages, you put out positive imagery. It's not just, hey, look at Josh, look at how hard he's hustling. It really is you're trying to convey this message of almost peace. But you've also had some really tough trials in your personal life through relationships. And I would like to talk about those, not the specifics of your relationships, obviously, but more of what does it mean when you have negative people in your life and how can you control environments or those types of relationships to make sure that you have a balance that suits you in that need. And I just real quick interjection here, but I have some personal relationships on my side, like even one I was dealing with this morning where it's like I got this text message, hey, can you show up to this thing? And I said, no, I'm not willing to show up to this thing for people that don't actually care about me. They have no vested interest in my family and me. They just want to put on a good face for other people. And it goes back to what you were talking about of almost taking, like, getting over to the riverbank and setting your canoe there and just taking some peace, getting out of that flow. But I think there takes a lot of structure of your external environment sometimes to really allow that to happen internally for one.
100%. Yeah, I have had a lot of challenges in the past 2 or 3 years, and I have taken myself out of environments that were, I'm going to just say, not serving me or my mental health. Right. And look, I come from a military family. I grew up on military bases for most of my life. Everything was a battle. Everything is like, something to overcome. Right. And I actually had to step out of that fighter type of mentality to be even aware, basically, that peace was an option. Like peace was never really an option for me up until a couple years ago, until I forced myself to choose peace. And so retooling my environment has been cutting people out of my life. It's been making sure that the people that I do need in my life are more present and I'm having more conversations with them, right? It's about my daily actions. Man, I just have to meditate every day. I have to.
Mm,
There's
mhm,
no question of it because I have all these things that are kind of hardwired in me from a very young age that if I don't, like, there definitely is a beast in there to wake up, right? And the more I've become aware of that, the more I've been able to not just soothe the beast and put the beast to sleep. And, I got this big evil thing hiding inside of me that could wake up at any time, but really find where that can be useful, right? Like where that can serve other people, where that can serve myself, how I can use a reaction, right? And turn it into a response.
mm,
And
mhm,
and that one particular statement right there has been a really big piece of it too. It's not a reaction, it's a response.
mm,
No, I very rarely, I should say, let myself get caught up in emotion, although I'm a super emotional and passionate person, right? Like
yeah,
all the things that I do and all the things that I value in life, art and music and all these things, right? They're all about passion and emotion and pouring yourself into something as wholly as you possibly can.
yeah,
You don't have to do that with, well, I say it, you don't have to do that with a reaction. You can do it more mindfully with a response. It's not a paint by numbers picture. It's, you know what I mean? It's like, it's something that can come out naturally and flow because the flow of life is really what makes the kayak ride interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Dude, that's so good. I love the response, not the reaction. That's something that I definitely needed to hear. I mean, it happened to me yesterday. I just got a little flustered at my kids, right? And and that's the flow. And I think that's the other thing to really highlight, in this conversation is everybody has it. Everybody has this monster, or at least I think most people do, even if they don't want to admit it. And what's the ancient proverb? It's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a warrior or in a war. And I just that has always stuck with me because I think we take this darkness, and what I'm referring to in the darkness here is not the passion, but the things we don't want to become external, the things that we don't enjoy about that flow. Maybe the rapids, since we're using the kayaking analogy, right? As we're about to between these rocks, for me, that can be anger, it can be frustration, it can be, loose lipped at times. I want to keep that dialed in. I really want to focus on my responses and not my reaction. We don't get it perfect every time. And I think that's the flow that you're referencing there is sometimes it does creep out, and there's nothing wrong with that. And too often times maybe we have this response of shame, or reaction of shame, better stated, where it comes out, it rears its head, and it's like, okay, now we got to get it back in, and we're all embarrassed for a while. But the reality is, hey, I'm going to take that lesson, I'm going to learn it. And then I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again. I'm going to reapply. I'm going to redirect the kayak down a different portion of the river or whatever it is, so that we're continuously learning. And I think that's the beauty of personal development. I think that's the beauty of being a human and on this journey together with other people that are trying to do the same thing.
Well, and I'll say it this way too. I don't think that reaction is always unwarranted. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like if I actually had this happen a couple weeks ago, I'm at a concert on a date with a girl and we kind of go to this bar afterwards and her and her friend are at the bar and I don't drink at all, but I hang out at bars all the time. This guy's too drunk. He gets a little handsy. I say, "Hey man, ease up, dude. Like chill out a little bit." He keeps on, and I go, "Hey, motherfucker," and like stood up and got ready to just pound this dude in the fucking ground, right? And that's not something I do all the time. Not something that I would show in an inappropriate instance for sure. I'm not going to do it in a business meeting or boardroom meeting, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
To defend a lady's honor, right? Who's just sitting there and having a drink, and we're enjoying each other's company, and then some rando comes up and tries to talk about, "Hey, kiss me," and try to reach for her boob. Like, I'm gonna beat the fuck out of that dude, right? And that's an appropriate response. There's no
Mhm.
shame in that. That's
Yeah.
not like something I need to look at and reflect on as like, how can I be better? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, I should have taken the soft approach. Fuck no, I'm taking a hard ass, jagged approach to that because that's what that situation requires.
Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Let's talk about, maybe move this into action for our listeners. How can we encourage them to really maybe become aware of that inner monologue, right? Understand where their strengths are, their weaknesses, the dark side that they should be embracing versus that of, hey, I'm going to only pull this out occasionally when it's warranted.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's about know what kind of person you want to be and know what you want out of life, right? You got to frame it there first and foremost, because if you don't, a lot of people wouldn't have put themselves in that situation that I was in. Those are the environments that I choose. I understand that that comes with some stuff, right? Being at concerts with tens of thousands of people comes with some stuff, right? I think also you really need to just take stock of what you're thinking, like literally day to day. The same way you would, I have a very good friend who's a nutritionist. He said, look, just write down everything that you put in your mouth for a week, like literally everything you put in your mouth. So, journaling, I think for a lot of people is very important because if you write down everything that you think as much as you can, right? I don't think you're ever going to be able to write all your thoughts, but if you write down the majority of what you're thinking throughout the day and how you're vibing throughout the day, and you go back and look at that a week later, you're going to really get a good perspective on who it is you're being, not who you want to be, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
then now you can sit back and compare the two and try to close that gap on who you're being and who you want to be.
Yeah. I think that's very, very powerful. And I've tried to do something similar in terms of what I consume. what apps I look at. I don't know if the same is on Android, but I have an iPhone, and iOS has this thing built in where it will tell you on a weekly basis how much you're using your phone, how many hours, how many minutes. Sometimes it's shocking. Sometimes you're like, whoa, there's no way I was on my phone for this amount of time, every single day on average. But it also breaks down how many minutes you're spending on each of the social media applications, on documents, on YouTube, whatever it is. And I think that breakdown is really helpful because that does, to your point, when you're trying to become more aware, what am I doing habitually, autonomously that I just don't even recognize? Like, that's the first step, is just stepping back and saying, okay, let me look at what I'm consuming. I've high anxiety. Am I eating really greasy foods and lots of sugar and then going into Netflix and sitting for hours, or just looking on X and going down this rabbit hole of all these things that I'm fearful of, right? That's probably not conducive to a great mentality. Again, stating things that I think most people know, but oftentimes we don't recognize in ourselves. And it's always good to start at that baseline. So I agree with that first point very much.
Yeah, and I think the second way to approach it is tracking and documenting how you're stepping away from that, right? Like again, for me, it's meditation. If I don't meditate, sit away from everything for at least one time a day, like I feel that shit the second and third day. I feel that frustration and anger and stuff bubbling up because that's my default negativity state, I guess is what I'm
Yeah.
gonna, right?
Yeah.
Well, I actually have a alarm set on my phone twice a day. And the first one is, hey, you need to do this. And sometimes I don't get to it or whatever. I don't really beat myself up about that. But if
Hmm.
I don't get to it that second time a day, like that second time a day is just it's like a, hey, you need to do this, dude, alarm. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What time is that at, if you don't mind me asking? What time do you have that set at?
I have one set at 7 a.m. and I have one set at 7 p.m.
Okay. Okay. So it's not necessarily a mid break, but it might be like generally before or after the work day.
Yeah, and I have it on my mind to do it throughout the day as well. So like, there's times where I'll just ignore both of those and I'll do it at like 1 p.m. or whatever. If I'm feeling particularly frustrated or agitated at work, like I'm literally going to step away from my desk and go sit over here and meditate for a little bit. Honestly, my coworkers think I'm batshit crazy half the time when I do it, but I could care less
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's what helps me be successful. And there's a method to the madness, so to speak, right?
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah. I think it's something that a lot of people don't do. Again, I think there's the recognition of, one of the things that we talk all the time about here at Habitual Growth is like we're very good at consuming material, but we're very poor at actually executing on it. And I think what you're really talking about here is now you've taken something that is on your darker side, and then you've transitioned that into something that fuels your growth, right? You're not getting rid of that emotion, you're converting it into something that says, hey, this behavior I need to make sure I'm doing every single day. Otherwise, I can feel the ramifications of it. I did it this morning, and I'm the same way. I'm very poor at meditating. It's something I'm actually working on. But like, if I don't do physical activity 2 days in a row, I can just feel my energy just building up. And it's something that I know, kind of what you were saying on the meditation. You miss it 2, 3 days in a row. It's always kind of been there for me, but I didn't recognize it in the same capacity that I do today while I've been trying to structure maybe more of my emotional journey in a more productive manner.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think for a lot of people, it's physical activity over meditation, to be honest, because you're diving into that somatic response, what your body and your hormones and your chemical composition are feeding up to your brain, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge part of it as well. Like the more physically fit and the more active that you can be is the greater reduction of those things, not
Hmm.
necessarily taking them away, not necessarily like diluting them or whatever. They still have that same potency, but like controllable, right?
Yeah.
I kind of think about it like this too. Bruce Lee talks a lot about water and how water can be used. If you really step back into modern times and you say, well, water jets can cut metal, like 3/4 inch, half inch, 2 inch metal can shoot right through that shit. But it can also feel really good and soothing and relaxing in a bath, right?
Yeah.
So I think if you think about your darker side in that way, your anger, your frustration, your doubt. It can take a lot of forms. It can fit the container of what you deem it to fit, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, are you just going to let it be a fire hose shooting out at everybody in your life? Or can you utilize some precision with it and make it create a beautiful piece of art, right? If it's a water jet, can it be a soothing, relaxing place in the case of this fight, the bar I'm talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Probably wasn't soothing, relaxing for that dude who was running up on the girls, but for the girls, it's a very soothing and calming and relaxing place for them because they
Yeah.
feel a sense of security
Yeah.
knowing that nobody's going to fuck with them at the end of the day.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And
Great
so
point.
it's about how it's tooled and it's about how it's utilized and how you're forming the container around your dark side that ultimately determines really good or bad, right? Like it could still be dark and be good, or it could be light and be bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, we've covered a lot of amazing topics in this. So I want to consolidate them quickly here and let me know if I missed anything. So, what I took away from this is one, find a picture of who you want to be in the future, first and foremost. Understand what type of person do you want to be. Do you want to be that jet cutter all the time and just chopping people off at the knees and cutting through metal? Or do you want to be somebody who can bend around other people or somewhere in the middle? And then two, really start by just tracking what you're consuming mentally, maybe even physically, nutritionally, whatever that is. But look at kind of try to take a baseline and then work towards changing some of those. Focus on, hey, I think this area over here, I'm a little too emotional. I'm a little too like a water jet, and maybe I need to reduce the stream and the pressure somehow. So I'm going to consume less social media. I'm going to look at cutting some people out of my life or redirecting the relationships into something a little bit more productive. And then three, setting up behaviors for myself that take that energy, really embracing the dark side, not necessarily shoving it down all the time, but really making it a part of my personality, but using that energy and a capacity that makes me a better person, a more productive person, a more successful and fulfilled person over time. Did I miss anything in that?
No, man. I mean, you nailed it right there. Again, I think the only thing I would add is just it's the container. You know what I mean? Like, what kind of container are you going to be for your positive and negative emotions and your light and your darkness? So you get to decide.
I love that. I mean, free will's a choice. We all have it, right? And you can choose to ignore it. You can choose to make those decisions, but either way, it is a decision. And I think that's one thing that needs to be reiterated here, just at the close. But not making a decision is a decision in itself. You are choosing to continue down the path that you are already on, and if you're okay with it, that's great. But if you find yourself in circumstances where, hey, this is not ideal, or I would love to see these areas of improvement, this is what habitual growth is all about. This is why we share the journeys of Josh and myself and the other people that we have on this podcast, because it's so incredible because we've lived it, right? You're not just taking this from, some guru who hasn't had these same challenges or some guy who's just on the internet traveling, and sharing good words that he steals from somebody else. I mean, these are real life experiences shared that we've all changed in our own lives over time.
Yep. You can pivot any way you want, anywhere you want, at any point in your life. I truly believe that.
That's right. And if you're like Josh, you become a star that is born. So, with that, my friend, how can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so Instagram at Lane Hero Boss, Joshua Perry on social media on Facebook, pretty easy to find, or right here with my friend Nathan. I'm sure he can plug in with me.
Absolutely. Reach out to us anytime. Josh, thank you so much for your time today. I know Sunday mornings are a little bit challenging, but appreciate you spending it with us and sharing this knowledge. And to everybody out there listening, let's go out there and let's get better this week. Thanks for watching.